Good morning, and you're joining us on My EntreLife. Today we have special guest Tanya Goff from the StoryBilder, and she's going to share her story with us today. Welcome, Tanya.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Happy to have you here. So, we want to find out a little bit about you. Who are you? What's your background, your education? What's your family life like?
Oh gosh, a lot of questions. Well, I was born in Montreal. I grew up in New Hampshire, north of Boston. Always had a really strong interest in theater and dance growing up. Ended up coming back to Canada to study at McGill. So I did my degree in English literature there. After university, I went to Japan to teach for a year. Came back. Wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do with my life. So I moved to, I ended up going to Toronto, where I did a master's in English literature. Again, in both cases, with a strong emphasis on Shakespeare history. And then ended up in San Francisco for a little while, back in Japan for 3 years. And when I was done with that, didn't know where I wanted to be or what I wanted to do when I grew up. So I landed in Toronto and spent the summer doing some freelance work, and then went to Stratford, Ontario, which I'd never been to in spite of having a degree in Shakespeare. And some of your viewers will know that, or your listeners will know that Stratford, Ontario has a world famous Shakespeare festival there. So I got on the train and I went to Stratford and immediately fell in love with it. And that was in October. By December, I'd moved there. And in February, I opened a CD and video store, which I ran for 10 years.
Wow, that was definitely not a direct path.
No, nothing about my life has been direct.
Which is great, because so many of us, we don't have that direct path. And it's really important for people to know that it's not always straight. It's the up and down and one side of the world to the other and everything else. So I noticed in your bio that you had a CD and video store, but then you niched into a Shakespeare market. Tell me about that. That seems like so crazy, weird, and different.
It does, but when you take into consideration that my degree was already in Shakespeare theater history, it wasn't that big a deal. So my CD store was in Stratford. I had a degree in Shakespeare theater history. My particular interest was always Shakespeare on film, but at the time that I was doing doing my master's degree, Shakespeare on film was still considered to be kind of one of those out there sort of not cool subjects to study. So I ended up not pursuing it. But when I moved to Stratford, there was an opportunity. I had a CD and video store. I was downtown. I was next to the Avalon Theater.
Okay.
I'll put in some Shakespeare videos. So I went out and I sourced all the Shakespeare videos that I could find, which was about 60 at the time. And I sold them from my store. And at the end of the summer, I got a phone call from somebody out in the Maritimes. And I'm not going to attempt a Maritime accent because I'm really bad at it. But he said, "Hey, I heard you have all of these Shakespeare videos. Do you have a catalog?" So somebody had been in my store, had gone back to Newfoundland and told him that I had all these Shakespeare videos, and he called. And I heard myself on the phone saying, "Yes, sir, we do." And I took his address and I got off the phone and I spent the night making a catalog, which at the time was an 11 by 17 piece of paper with a list of all the films that we had, and another piece of paper stuffed in with an order form. And I mailed it off to him and he placed an order. So the next summer, I made copies. We distributed them from the store. People started picking them up. The end of that summer, a teacher came in and asked me if I was going to be exhibiting at a major high school conference that was going to be in Chicago at the end of the summer. And I said, sure. So I did. And it continued to snowball from there. So very shortly after that, this is fairly early in the e-commerce world. So our first website was a static HTML web page with a page that you actually printed and filled out and mailed into us because there was no such thing as online ordering. And then we soon morphed into a more dynamic website as soon as those were invented. We used OS Commerce right out of the box, ended up highly customizing it. And by the time we all was said and done, we had over 3,000 Shakespeare-related items in the catalog and customers in 42 countries around the world. So
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, and it was just by saying yes.
And all from you falling in love with Stratford as well.
It was a combination of being in Stratford. The proximity of the Stratford Festival gave me an opportunity, and it was really about my own passion for Shakespeare on film. So.
Wonderful, wonderful. So now, in your bio, you had also mentioned that you had faced some struggles. What I'm wondering is, could you share a bit of the struggles and how did that affect your path?
Sure. There are a couple of, well, I can think of two major ones. When I was in high school, I was extremely good at math, but I'm of an age and grew up in a location where girls in math was never really all that, favored or supported. And I had a particular affinity for geometry, and actually had, I think, was 115% average in the class, because he had to keep giving me extra credit, or giving everybody else extra credit, in order for them to all pass by the time he got on his curve. At one point, and this was pretty important for me, he gave me a graduate level MIT proof to take home as extra credit, just to challenge me, because I was really not being challenged at all. I was basically just showing up for the tests and acing everything. And I solved it. It took me 3 days to do it, but I did it. And I took it in, and I was so proud of myself. And he took one look at the answer, said it was right, and then looked at me and told me that my father had done it for me. My father was a mathematician.
Ooh.
I got no credit for it. And at that point, I really stopped caring about math. It was compounded by the fact that my trig teacher was really hostile to women. By the time I got to calculus, we had a really great teacher who was amazing and who I love very much. But by then, all of the fire had been taken out of my belly. And so, if you think about choices that I made, and my choices to go into English and to Shakespeare in particular had more to do with where I felt welcome than it did where I actually had natural ability. So if that had happened to me now, well, actually, I don't know. If being a girl now, I think it might have been easier. I don't know that it would have been all that great. It would still be difficult. But I know for a fact that if I had been a boy, that they would have fast-tracked me for MIT. And I know this for a fact because my nephew did the exact same thing, and his teacher fast-tracked him for MIT. So yeah, it's a little bit of a weird thing, and very defining. The fact that I still do programming sort of harkens back to that skill set. But it's something that I had to come back to naturally, and when I was ready for it, it was really it really affected a lot of the choices that I made for at least a decade after that.
Wow. And it really makes you wonder how things like that affect other women and even men and youth, especially at school, when you're being told by someone that you can't do it, or that somebody else did it for you. How many of us have had skills suppressed? Oh,
I think in the millions. I think that it's a very normal thing when you're female, and I think that it's so normalized that unless it's something that's as obvious and as just insanely hurtful as that was, I don't think that we even notice it anymore, because I think we've just become so normalized to being told that on a regular basis. When I was in junior high school, I had 100% average in geography. I like the geos. And my teacher insisted on giving me a 99 for the year, in spite of the fact that I aced every single one of the tests, because he said that if I'd gotten 100, then it meant I knew as much as the teacher, and that was unacceptable.
Ooh.
So this stuff happens. I think teachers have a lot of power, and I think especially for girls growing up, especially in STEM areas, I think that it's very, very easy to crush a girl's potential in that space with just an offhanded comment, or by just not taking them seriously in a way that they should be.
Well, I know even myself, not anywhere near as serious of yours, but I know that my ability to speak French was actually limited by myself, because my eldest daughter, when she was in kindergarten, would make fun of me and laugh at me at how I would pronounce the French words because she was in French immersion.
Mm.
And that small thing affects me to this day. And I'm very conscious of how I pronounce words. And this was from my 5-year-old, which is probably a little bit crazy. But to think that that affected me, and then to think that we have teachers out there that are telling people that they're not good at something or they'll never achieve this.
Mm.
And I know even in the high schools now, as the kids are going through the planning process for the rest of their future, or for the beginning of their future, really, they're being told as early as grade 9 that if they don't do this, they can't do that. So it's like we're limiting them from really being who they can be, from inventing themselves and finding themselves. Would you agree with that?
I do. For me, I mean, particularly, I think that well, there's two parts of it. There's the institutional issue, which is that if you don't play the game by their rules, then you can't succeed. But then there's the more obvious one, which I guess my example would point to, which is where there's clear aptitude, but being told that you can't, or that you didn't, or that you lied in some way because they just don't know what to do with you. For sure. And I find, well, they're both damaging, but I think that they're both damaging in very different ways. So.
Yeah, for sure. So let's see. I'm trying to think, where should we go from here? Because I'm so moved by your story, and you do see it all the time. And I want all the females out there, everyone out there, female, male, whatever, alien, purple person, I don't know. But I want everyone to know that you are all awesome and you all have your own unique skills. They may not be traditional education. They may be something else that you don't learn in school, but you all have skills, and to make sure that you embrace them and honor them, because we cannot let other people tell us we can't do something if that's what we want to do. We need to go for it and do what we can to grow in that field and to develop those skills.
Yeah, I think that there's always a how. So if there's something that you want to do, figure out how you can do that. If you're not good at some part of it, well, figure out what you can do to offset that with something else. And then just keep trying at it. There's almost always a way of doing what it is that you want to do, unless it's win American Idol. But, you know, I mean, if somebody gets lucky,
don't
but that's...
discount yourself. You could win American Idol.
You could win American Idol, but most people don't.
Yeah, maybe you're the only contestant. Everybody has food poisoning.
Yeah, well,
maybe you created.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply, and you shouldn't try, and you shouldn't put your best foot forward, because you just don't know how far you can go. I think it's the distance that matters far more than the end game, is what I'm trying to say.
So you have reinvented yourself a few times, way back going to high school. Tell me, was it easy to reinvent yourself both personally and in business? I know that with the CD video, it originally gave way, or it ended up giving way to something else as the markets changed.
Yeah, and when the markets changed after that, I mean, you know, when YouTube and Napster happened, it became clear that my Shakespeare catalog couldn't survive anymore. Napster, of course, you know, took a major, you know, the music industry took a major hit from that. So I had to reinvent myself again and I ended up going into content management. I think for me, it's very much about finding opportunity. I think it's probably my mathematical brain that directs me in those ways, where I know that something's not working or I need to make a change. Sometimes it's just something falls in my lap, like an offer to go teach in Japan. The first time I went to Japan, I think I had a month's notice. The second time I went, I had a week. I was living in San Francisco. They invited me to go work for Sony Language Laboratories. I had to pack up everything into my car, drive across country, leave the car with my mom and ask her to sell it for me, put everything in storage, and within a week I was in Tokyo. So
sometimes those are the best things, when you just...
And I stayed for 3 years, yeah. So I think that sometimes it's about recognizing opportunity and grabbing it when you can. And sometimes I think it's about creating a plan and something that you know that is important to you, that you know that you can actually achieve, which is what I did with StoryBuilder, which is when I got the idea for StoryBuilder, I knew I knew right away what it was. And because I had a background in business, and because I could do my own developing, and because I have a background in teaching and in English, it was doable. It wasn't easy, but it was doable, and I could make a plan, and I could follow that.
So how did you know when it was time to make the switch? Were there any signs that you can say that led you to make that decision to close one business and enter another?
Usually it was environmental, I guess, or situational. With the CD store, I closed because Napster was happening, and also the Stratford Shakespeare Festival wanted my space for their theater store. So if you go into the theater store at the Avon Theater now, the far half of it was where my store used to be, which is kind of weird.
That was sort of your tipping point.
It was a tipping point for me. It was a good opportunity for me to close down the music portion of things at a time when I could see that Napster was going to be affecting it negatively. So again, it was an opportunity, but it happened to happen at a time when I think it needed to happen. With this, I continued to run the Shakespeare catalog for another several years. Let me think, another 5 years, I think. And for me, the tipping point for that was the introduction of Napster and the introduction of YouTube. The idea that I used to be able to sell a video of Last Action Hero because there's a 2-minute clip in it of Arnold Schwarzenegger saying, "To be or not to be, that is the question." And he goes, or no, sorry, he goes, "To be or not to be, not to be," and there's a huge explosion. And people would spend $14 to buy the video so they could use that in their class. But I knew that with YouTube happening, they wouldn't have any need to buy it anymore. They would be able to stream it online. So for me, it became, it was clear that it was time to get out of that business and that I wasn't going to be able to keep up with the technology. Usually when those kinds of big shifts happen, there's a big shuffling of business. The big businesses with the resources will step in and sort of dominate the space, as Amazon did, as YouTube did, as Netflix did. And while there's probably opportunity to go back and do it again now, where I could probably get in and earn affiliate income off of a lot of those platforms, the people who were already in that space who were small, like me, just didn't really have a chance of surviving it. So it was time to close down. So I did, and had to go back into the mean old world.
So those are good points for our listeners to be aware of what's happening around you and what innovations and different things are coming down the line that could affect your business. It sounds like you were very in tune to what was happening, so you were able to make those good choices to move, to pivot and reinvent. So now I'd like to know a little bit about StoryBuilder. Tell me about what it is and what it does and how it works.
So StoryBuilder is a platform to help people write novels or to write stories. Right now it's sort of geared for novel writing, but it can be stories of any kind. I think that it came from sort of a combination of my teaching background, my love for writing. I've also written 2 middle grade fantasy novels, which are out there in the world. You can look them up. And I've got a short story that's actually coming out in Amazing Stories magazine this month. So writing has always been a side hobby, something that I've always done on my own. So if you take that and my teaching background, also education always played a really strong part for me in building the Shakespeare catalog. The idea for StoryBuilder actually came out of a conversation I was having with a friend. And when I realized what StoryBuilder was going to be, it sort of came, it's a really bizarre thing, but it actually came to me almost completely intact. I knew from beginning to end what it was and what it needed to be. And what it was is a series, it's basically 3 parts. One of them is a guided tour to writing. So if you don't know how to write a novel, if you don't know how to put your pieces together, it'll take you from, through the steps one at a time, all the way through. And then underneath that was it needed to have a really robust and useful set of editing tools so that anybody could come in and use the system in any order that they want. The big problem being that people all have different writing styles, and some people like to start at the beginning and write to the end. Some people need help, some people don't. Some people like to just jump in and start throwing stuff together and making something up as they go along. And to create a platform or a tool that all of those people could use, and that would be not just useful for them, but would be fun and would also help to stimulate ideas was kind of the key piece to this. So once I understood how to do that, I really, it was sort of fait accompli for me. I just had to do it. So I wanted to create a place where people could write stories, where they could collaborate. I've got a library where you can borrow pieces from our library or share your own. So if I like your characters, I could borrow your characters and use them in my story. Or if you like my world, you can put your characters in my world. And so everything starts to evolve out of that. Plus a bunch of really cool visualization tools like maps and timeline tracking, so that people can actually see what they're creating as they go along and help them plan.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. You talked about why you're passionate about it. I loved that you were telling me about it's your personal passion for writing. That is one of the reasons that you created the business, that you created the StoryBilder. Was it easy for you to determine that that was a passion you should act on?
I knew it was something that I needed to do. It was difficult to come up with a plan for it and to make it real. So I spent a year doing business planning for it, creating wireframes. I actually went home that day that I got the idea, and I did 60 pages of wireframes that are pretty much what I ended up building in the long run. So I think my vision was very intense and very specific at the time. But I did go out and look at accelerators. I found it difficult to sort of get any sort of traction anywhere. Of course, having the idea and the potential markets that I had, it was still very difficult to get meetings. I mean, like, nobody wanted to talk to me without a minimal viable product. So you get into that catch-22 of how do you create a product with no money? How do you get money with no product? And you can't do one without the other. So I spent about a year chasing that. I joined VentureLab, which I ended up not spending too much time with, but they got me on the right path. And after about a year, I realized that I was wasting a lot of time chasing money when, in fact, I could build this thing myself. So by then I was fairly committed to the idea, and I'd already spent a year developing it and deciding what it is that I wanted to do. So once I decided that I would build it myself, it was a question of finding the right platform to do that, the right language that I could work with, that wouldn't require a huge amount of catch up on my part. And my Shakespeare catalog was actually an ASP site, but there was going from ASP to PHP was not a really big deal. And I'd worked with a lot of PHP sites when I went to corporate. So I ended up picking Drupal as my platform, and I started to build it. And it took me about 3 years to get there, but it was a question of just scaling back the amount of work that I was doing for pay to make room to make sure that I could do it. So it was sacrifice. There were a lot of things I had to sacrifice to get there.
You bring up a really good point about chasing money. And there's so many startups I know, so many entrepreneurs who have ideas, and they do spend a lot of time chasing money. And my own experience has been that if you don't have a high-tech startup that's highly scalable and sexy, to put it simply, that it's going to be a lot harder to find money. Yes, there are grants out there. Yes, there are loans, there are angel investors, but the percentage of people who can actually access them, especially females, is really low, really low. If you don't have the right type, even the accelerators and incubators are geared more for the high-tech, high-growth startups, or perhaps a food-based accelerator. They're not for every business. And I don't think people realize how narrow the actual field is.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is that StoryBilder actually is high tech. It is massively scalable,
Yes.
and it is really sexy. I mean, the look on people's faces when I demo it for them, they get what I call the look, where you can sort of see their face gets really, really quiet, but you can see their eyes starting to move, like they've got all of these gears going. And almost everybody who's seen it has come up with a different way that they can use it. I mean, I wanted to create an open system where, which was basically hackable. So you can use it for whatever it is you want. I've got screenwriters who want to use it to help them storyboard. I've got game developers who are interested in using it to help them develop games and create their world building and to sort of plot all of their storylines before they start designing their actual game parts. I have professors at MIT and University of New Hampshire and Adelphi who've all been really, over the moon, excited by it, but getting tractions with the VCs and getting money, it just still isn't there. And I hate to say it, but you kind of have to sit back and start wondering if it isn't just because you're a woman. I mean, I just don't know.
They don't understand it. They don't understand that particular content. I have friends who are building a storyfied gaming platform. And when they go to other countries, the VCs, the investors understand it. But here in Canada, they don't.
They don't.
They're looking for something more conservative, something they can easily understand. So as soon as you give them something that they don't have any knowledge of or any real use for themselves, it's just out of there. It's not a viral video game. So, well, it's not Angry Birds. If it was Angry Birds and making millions of sales, it'd be different.
Right.
But when you're starting out, you really need to prove yourself and really be able to show them numbers before they have any interest.
Right. And for me, it really just came down to making a decision. Chasing the money is just too time consuming right now. Anytime that I'm spending chasing money means that I'm not actually building it and getting it to market. And I would much rather get to market.
Exactly.
It was much more important for me to create a plan that I knew I could do on my own, something that I knew was achievable without outside help. And then, when it gets out there and people realize and they want to come and offer me money, well, you know what, that actually puts me in a better position where I can be making choices about who I'm taking money from. And really, I'd be looking for people who can advance my business in a really meaningful way, as opposed to just taking money for the sake of taking money and from whoever happens to offer it. And to me, I mean, it's great to have the money, but it's more important for me to have people with, to partner with people who have access to market, who understand the technology and who can help me advance the product and make it better. And that to me is as important, if not more important than the money, because I think that when you do things right, the money's going to happen. I'm not a very field of dreams kind of person, but in this case, I think it's really the only way to do it, because I know that based on everything that I've seen and the reactions people have had to the product, I know that it's right. So I have to trust, which is a word I don't like to use. I have to trust that people will come to it because they'll recognize that it's a really cool thing and it's something they want to be a part of.
Well, and it sounds like you are very familiar with identifying trends and changes in the market. So you will be able to say, if it comes to a point where you need to say stop, that it's not working. Sorry, we have a really mischievous puppy joining our podcast today.
That's fine. We absolutely don't mind.
Yes. So I have one last question for you before we wrap up today.
Sure.
And I wanted to know, what advice would you give women who need a change?
For women who need a change, I think you need to be really clear about what it is you need to change and why you need to change it. I don't tend, so my family background, my father, the mathematician, when he will go into the kitchen and he'll stand in the corner of the kitchen, completely shocked still. And you'll think to yourself, what the earth is he doing in there? And what he's doing is he's about to make toast. And before he makes the toast, he's thinking about all the parts, all the things he has to do to make the toast. And he's calculating in his mind what the most efficient way is to make the toast. And when he understands that, he goes and he does it. I know it's a really simple thing to do. It doesn't require, most of the things that we do, and especially as women, we just do instinctively and we just go and make the toast. But if you're going to make a really, really big change, you really do need to stop and figure out what you're doing before you do it.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to leave your job, understand why you want to leave your job. Are you leaving your job because the work you're doing isn't challenging? Well, if that's the case, then you need to be looking for work that makes you happy. So what is that? Are you leaving your job because it's a toxic environment? And goodness knows, I've been in, my share of those as well. Then you need to find another job in a better place, and you need to find people that you want to work with. Mm-hmm. So, if you want to start a company, why do you want to start a company? Do you want to start a company because it's cool and because everybody's doing it, because that's how you think you're going to make $1 million? Or do you have a really, really good product that you think is really important to people and that's going to change the world? And of course, my personal plea to the world is please don't make products that aren't useful. We have enough junk out there.
That needs a high five.
Thank you.
High five there.
Thank you. I'm up there. Just because you have a thing that you think you can do that's cool or it's nifty, is it really useful? And if it's not, just don't do it, or find a way to make it useful, and then go and do that. Mm-hmm. And it needs to make you happy. If you're going into business to create something and it's not something you care about passionately, then you're not going to make it. So, you've got to figure out your whys. And once you've got that figured out, then a lot of those other decisions really sort of become apparent to you. But it requires a lot of thinking, and you need to take time off. You need to disconnect from everything, make lists if that's what you do, talk to your friends, and do some soul searching before you make that big change. I mean, if you're going to change your job or go into business or even change your basic relationships, I mean, those things really matter, and you should do them you should be creating a world for yourself that makes you the best person that you can be, and as well as the people around you. And I feel really strongly about that. So.
Now, that is wonderful, wonderful advice. Mm-hmm. So we are at the end of our time today. So thank you, Tanya Goff, for joining us. And Tanya, of course, is with the StoryBilder, and that is Builder, BILDER.
The website's storybuilder.com. Yeah, just
wonderful. So check Tanya's work out on StoryBilder and join us for the next episode. Thank you, Tanya, for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Yes.